Hello everyone, welcome back to Spectator Sports, where we cover sports from a spectator's point of view. This is episode number 127. The championship matchups are set as the NFL playoffs have reached their final four, and we're here to recap divisional round action across the NFL playoffs. But before we get into this week's content, please do us a massive favor. We are on the grind to 300 subscribers by the end of the NBA Finals in June, and you can drop a like on this video. Subscribing to the channel would be a massive favor to this channel and helping us grow, reaching a broader audience. And if you want to get clips from today's episode, we got that for you here on YouTube and our various playlists, as well as on TikTok for now. And if you want to enjoy Spectator Sports from an audio perspective, we got that for you on Spotify. I'll link everything in the description, and let's get into this week's episode. Patrick Mahomes has been a perfect 6-0 entering this year's divisional round matchup against the Houston Texans. And the Texans, in their previous week matchup in the wildcard round, have been great. Pass rush got home, rattled Justin Herbert into a horrific performance, throwing 4 interceptions, and they would only dream of replicating that type of performance against a team like the Kansas City Chiefs. Unfortunately for the Texans, they were just outclassed from the jump. I mean, if you think about special teams, their opening kickoff was returned to inside the Texans' 30-yard line, and additionally, Ka'imi Fairbairn has been a decent kicker this year, but there's been a lot of shortcomings for him this season. If you think about all the missed kicks, this was a microcosm of the season. He had 2 missed field goals, including a blocked field goal late in the ball game that could have made it a 1-possession game, and a missed extra point that sucked momentum after a painstakingly long 10-minute drive against the Kansas City Chiefs defense, capped off by a Joe Mixon touchdown. The final score was 23-14, and this is pretty much how I expected the game to go. The Texans would keep it close, but they would be outclassed late by the Kansas City Chiefs. And we saw a lot of interesting calls on the Houston Texans defenders, where there were a lot of times where Patrick Mahomes was taking hits in the pocket and he was getting sacked, and those were clean defensive plays, but a ticky-tack foul that was deemed roughing the passer, where on first glance, yeah, I could maybe see that it was a hit on the head below the chin strap on Patrick Mahomes, but if you look at instant replay, he just got the chest plate. Like we've been saying with the whole Sam Darnold face mask against the LA Rams in their first matchup in the regular season, let's expand replay to look at contact of the quarterback, especially face masks and even blows to the head. But another issue was when Mahomes slid late, causing 2 Texans defenders to collide into each other, and this caused another personal foul, roughing the quarterback when he was giving himself up on a slide. The problem is, it's just like the Trevor Lawrence late slide earlier this season, where it was late and the defender doesn't have a lot of time to react, and there's honestly no other choice but to collide. And sometimes they let softer collisions go, but this looked a little bit more clumsy and looked a little bit more violent, and the refs, of course, have the obligation to protect the quarterback, especially a guy like Patrick Mahomes. Unfortunately for the NFL conspiracists out there, this only raises their concerns about the NFL being rigged in favor of a Chiefs three-peat. The Texans operated pretty decently for the most part of this game, but then their whole pass protection scheme broke down in the later part of this game. I mean, I saw so many pivotal sacks from the Kansas City Chiefs defensive front, namely Chris Jones and George Karlaftis, who had 3 sacks on the day. He made CJ Stroud's life a living hell. I mean, there were so many times where CJ Stroud just had no room to breathe, and Karlaftis is in his face, taking him down for a pivotal sack. The major thing the Texans need to work on in this offseason is pass protection, and also definitely spice up the play calling. I mean, Slowick has been a guy that was a hot commodity last season and probably should have taken a head coaching gig when he had the opportunity, but this regression that we're seeing between his play calling abilities, the offense, and the regression of CJ Stroud was appalling this year. And I think winning against the LA Chargers definitely exceeded some expectations heading into the postseason, but they stood no chance against a team like the Kansas City Chiefs. And while there may be tiers between the Chiefs, the Bills, and maybe the Ravens, but the Texans are still not close to those 3 teams in terms of AFC supremacy. For the Kansas City Chiefs, this is now their 7th straight AFC Championship game appearance, and this is their 6th time in this last 7 years that they've hosted the AFC Championship game. I mean, they might as well rename it the Chiefs Invitational. It used to be the Brady Patriots Invitational. Well, it's now the Mahomes Chiefs Invitational with Andy Reid and Travis Kelce, who those two linked up for a great touchdown in the second half, and that's pretty much how you expect this team to be. I mean, they're not going to look pretty. They don't get a lot of style points, but at the end of the day, they make the plays where they need to, and now they're hosting another AFC Championship game. Jaden Daniels leads the Washington Commanders into the top-seeded Lions Den in Detroit and pulls off a shocking upset as the Commanders win 45-31. This game, I underestimated the Commanders yet again. I mean, it's time to give it up for Jaden Daniels having the best rookie season. Not even arguably the best rookie season, the best rookie season. Jaden Daniels is just so calm, cool, collected, poised, whatever have you. The compliments just continue to flow for many NFL analysis in the sport. He always has a smile on his face. I mean, last week he got cut up on the face and just still smiling with a Band-Aid on his face. This week, maybe some players are drawing at him on the opposite sideline against Detroit, and he's still having a ear-to-ear smile on his face. It's such a charming guy. The way he's just so slippery in the pocket reminds me of how Lamar looks early on in his career, and the two comparisons will stay for many years. I mean, if you think about how this team is built, it's very similar to how the Ravens are built. Despite the Detroit Lions coming out strong, I mean, they had some pretty good offensive looks, brought in some trickery with Jameson Williams on an end around, but the turnovers. Sloppy Detroit turnovers reared its ugly head as Jared Goff was terrible, honestly. He's had a great year, but when the lights shine the brightest and he needed to provide a spark, his turnovers proved pivotal for the Detroit Lions. He had 4 turnovers on the night, 3 interceptions, and I'm going to talk about the first couple of turnovers. The first one was a fumble in the red zone that took points off the board, and they could have had easily at least a 3-point opportunity with the field goal. The pick 6, he's just getting greedy at this point. I mean, if you think about it's coming off the heels of a great touchdown drive by Jaden Daniels and Terry McLaurin. They just combined on a score, but he gets a little bit aggressive. He has Sam Laporta sitting right there on a hitch route, taking a modest 7-yard gain, and he tries to get a little bit too aggressive, tries to squeeze the ball in there, overshoots it, and it's returned for a pick 6. And that's a pivotal moment in the game when instead not only do the Lions miss an opportunity to score to compete in this rapid scoring pace with the Commanders, they give up a touchdown on their own, and now they're down 10 points. Later in the second quarter, he's trying to go for it all and simply gets the route undercut by Mike Sanistril, the Commanders' standout rookie cornerback from Michigan this year. Sanistril has had a recent upcoming. I mean, he's been solid for much of this year, but recently the play has picked up. Let's just be honest. It's there in the tape, pass deflections, tackling, he's getting interception. He's showing up everywhere in the stat sheet, and I really do think that they definitely have a good cornerback in Mike Sanistril. The Commanders' interception just before halftime, I think, was just so backbreaking because at a minimum, you might be down 31-24, and I think Detroit was getting the ball back in the second half. You could tie it up. You could go for 2-for-1 situation, but going down into half, not just by 10 points, but it being a 2-possession ball game just feels pretty deflating if you're a Detroit Lions fan. And the momentum for the Commanders continued to build when they just got really gutsy, when it was a lot of 4th and short opportunities, 4th and 2, 4th and 3, and Dan Quinn laid it all out on the line. He was gutsy, he was aggressive, wasn't fearful of Detroit, and really matched Dan Campbell's energy in terms of being uber aggressive. And there were times that aggressive nature paid off. I mean, the first one with Marcus Mariota was kind of botched, but if you think about the rest, all of them were converted. Several of them were just very key high IQ plays by Jaden Daniels, and then just Detroit laying an egg. I mean, 12 men on the field on a 4th and 2. I mean, where is your head at? You can't even count in a playoff game. And immediately Brian Robinson cashes in for a touchdown to go up 17 points. That is the backbreaker at that point for the Detroit Lions. Think about how Detroit, they just got too cute. The Jamison Williams interception, I mean, it's a nice gadget play. It has a lot of potential, but if there's nothing there, just chuck it out of bounds, man. You just have to live to fight for another down. Your defense is giving you nothing, and I understand you gotta be aggressive, but be smart about it too. And that was yet another turnover that resulted in Washington points. 3 out of the 5 turnovers resulted in touchdowns for the Washington Commanders in this game. And yet again, I need to go back to Jaden Daniels. Him finding guys like Diami Brown and Zach Ertz and Terry McLaurin, I mean, on a consistent basis. Diami Brown was a guy that was targeted by Amon-Ra St. Brown when he routinely recites the receivers picked over him in the 2021 draft. And it's kind of like a Draymond thing where he remembers all the names or draft picks that was selected above him. And that's great. I like the fuel to the fire. But that extra interview, I thought heading into the playoffs was definitely bulletin board material where unnecessary. I think when you have a chance to just prove your play, I mean, Amon-Ra has proven himself. He's been a first team All-Pro, multiple-time Pro Bowl player at this point, and to rub it in the face to a guy like Diami Brown, where he has been marred early on in his career. I mean, he had Carson Wentz, he had Taylor Heineke, and Sam Howell last year. I mean, if the situations were flipped, how do we know Amon-Ra St. Brown doesn't have a poor start to his career? But I felt like that dynamic definitely fueled Brown's play. And I mean, Brown showed up. Diami Brown was the leading receiver for the Washington Commanders on this Saturday night, even having more yards than Terry McLaurin. For Daniels to come into this hostile crowd, it is against the number 1 overall seed in the biggest game of his career. At this point, he's playing with house money. I mean, he's got his playoff win. Nobody would really blame him if he were to lay a dud against a team that's so high-powered in Detroit. He had other ideas. He's going for it all and was super aggressive, and just credit to Jaden Daniels. Phenomenal game. I have to say, I feel awful for Detroit fans and just the Detroit team. I mean, this year they seem destined to not only just make their first Super Bowl in franchise history, but to win it. This has been 2 years in the making, pretty much. Last year, they proved it that they can contend with teams like the Kansas City Chiefs. They were this close to making their first Super Bowl last season against the San Francisco 49ers. They blew a 17-point lead. And then you come into this year, you have 15-2 record, you have the first number 1 seed in franchise history. The playoffs go through Detroit, and unfortunately, when the moment mattered the most, they fail. And it's disappointing, very sad for the Detroit Lions fans. I mean, they've been a franchise that's been looking for a special moment like this. And unfortunately, I think the biggest reason for this is, like I said, the turnovers, but also their defense being completely decimated. The defense for Detroit has been under a siege of injuries, and it's been a revolving door of defensive back, linebacker, defensive end. I mean, namely stars like Marcus Davenport, Aiden Hutchinson, Carlton Davis, Malcolm Rodriguez, the linebacker. I mean, the list goes on and on. There's only so much you can overcome, and if it's all on one side of the ball, I mean, it's fantastic that Aaron Glenn has gotten his side to this point. It's unfortunate that they couldn't see it through due to unforeseen circumstances like injuries. I do expect them to be back very much this year, but the other dynamic is going to be Ben Johnson leaving the Detroit Lions for greener pastures in the Chicago Bears, which we'll talk about later in this podcast. But very sad for Detroit. I mean, this was a year that many people thought that this was their year, but unfortunately, injuries and a budding superstar quarterback had other things to say about this. Saquon Barkley runs over the Los Angeles Rams yet again in another spectacular performance, essentially recreating the LaShawn McCoy snowball game where LaShawn ran for 217 yards against the Detroit Lions in 2013. Well, Saquon Barkley almost matched that production with 205 yards, including 2 big long runs against this LA Rams defense. It really was the difference in this game. What a player, what a season. And I mean, where would the Eagles be without Saquon Barkley? The guy has ran for 200 yards in both appearances against the LA Rams, has accrued over 500 yards from scrimmage in the two matchups. That is single-handedly one man beating an entire team. In the first matchup, he went for 255, a career high, but I mean, in this game, went for 205. The second one in particular, when I really thought that was the Eagles, him stamping the Eagles ticket to the NFC Championship game. It was a 78-yard touchdown run. Just so deflating when a Rams team is battling in the snow. That's something they're not accustomed to, being a Southern California team. Well, they battled hard, they battled really well, and it was just a very phenomenal game to see such a fantastic wintry atmosphere between the Eagles and Rams. Jared Verse came into this week with a lot of animosity against not only just the Eagles, but Eagles fans, and he was playing the role of villain coming into this week. I mean, he backed up the talk. I mean, 2 sacks, 3 tackles for loss, a lot of negative plays against the Eagles' very good offensive line, but if you think about, that's great as a pass rusher, that's excellent. But remember, as a defense, we're talking about stopping an entire offense, and there's only so many ways you can stop a team. And to get run over by a combined rushing total of 285 yards, I think that's really eye-popping right there. So congrats on Jared Verse having a great individual stat line, and the Rams defensive front coming in on 7 sacks, which is phenomenal. 16 sacks in 2 games, excellent work. But where was the run defense? Because they got run over by Saquon Barkley in 2 matchups for over 200 yards. And it wasn't just Saquon running over the Rams. Jalen Hurts also had his longest touchdown run of his career when he ran for over 40 yards on the first touchdown run. I understand a lot of people will come at Jalen Hurts, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but he did have his struggles, I'll give him that. I do not like him taking all those sacks, and the injury now to his knee is something to keep a watch for this week heading into the championship game, but he made the plays that he needed to make. I think with the legs, if you think about his passing ability, it wasn't the crispest performance, but I do think that he did have opportunities that were just taken off the board, whether it was penalties. A.J. Brown had a bad drop that could have been easily a touchdown catch, and he could have had a tush-push touchdown. Was wiped out by a Lane Johnson false start. Dallas Goedert would have set up a 1st and goal opportunity. The list goes on and on. I think Jalen Hurts has been doing what's been asked of him, but there's been times this game that I think the Eagles play calling, whether it was calling a passing play right after the knee injury was sustained, where Jalen just couldn't move around the pocket and took a safety, that's on Kellen Moore, just like the week before against the Packers. And you also have the issues with just the pass catchers not being up to standard. This was a game where the Eagles really missed out on a lot of opportunities. I mean, Jake Elliott, who's had a little bit of a shaky year this year, I mean, he's been pretty reliable, and thankfully his field goals went through. I mean, especially that 44-yard kick that was vital for the Eagles' chances to win this game. But the 2 missed extra points plus the one that he missed in the wild card round is starting to get concerning for me. All these kicks are missing wide left, and I'm definitely growing concerned about Jake Elliott's ability to make kicks, but hopefully continues to be successful. He's making field goals, and they can live with the extra points. But if you think about the missed extra points, the penalties in the red zone, the sacks taken by Jalen Hurts, and the drop by A.J. Brown, that's wiping out around 22 points in this game. In this game, instead of being a very close game that was 6-point by the final margin, it could have been a blowout. We can play shoulda, coulda, woulda, but there's absolutely times where the Eagles beat themselves and made it close than it had to be, while they were displaying that they were by far the superior team for this ball game. I understand many people will talk about, well, the snow bailed out the Eagles. Well, let's just look at the tape where even in the previous matchup, the Rams just did not have a good enough matchup against the Eagles. They were outmanned. They could not handle the Eagles' defensive front. And let's talk about the Eagles' defense. I mean, this Eagles' defense saved the day yet again. We talked about Saquon on the offensive side. Well, we have to talk about the defense. They were missing Nakobe Dean, who suffered a season-ending torn patellar tendon. Also, they lost Quinion Mitchell, their standout rookie cornerback on the outside after the first drive. And you're having Isaiah Rodgers come in as the backup. And I thought, as a defense, they did a pretty good job on Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp. They got loose for a couple outstanding plays where Puka just beat Darius Slay on a route. Cooper Kupp makes a phenomenal play, and then you even have Demarcus Robinson just out-jumping Isaiah Rodgers on that jump ball. But for the most part, they kept them in check, and they also got home. I know they didn't have 7 sacks, but the 5 sacks were pivotal in this game. They had Jalix Hunt, Moro Ojomo, a strip sack by Nolan Smith, and then 2 big sacks by Jalen Carter. I mean, the second one in particular saved the game. And I just need to talk about Jalen Carter. I've been so high on this kid ever since being drafted 9th overall in last year's NFL draft. The strides he's made from rookie year, which he actually had a really good year up until maybe December, where he had 6.5 sacks, a fumble return for a touchdown. And this year, the sacks aren't there. I absolutely understand. But the man is getting double team, held, whatever have you, all ball game long. But his 2 sacks, his pass deflection, the tackle for loss, and the second sack where he basically saved the game, and his QB hits were just so vital to the Eagles' victory. He is the next coming of Aaron Donald. You can guarantee that. The sack itself, the Eagles were clinging to a 6-point lead at this point. It was at the 13-yard line, one good route in the snow where a defender maybe slips. The Rams score, they kick the extra point. It's bye-bye season. It's over. Rams pull up a shocking upset. But Jalen Carter's sack changed the whole complexion of the ball game when it was from a 3rd and 2 on the 13-yard line to a 4th and 11 with a clock running. Ball is outside the red zone now, and they're just kind of scrambling. And then he delivers again with a quarterback hit on Matthew Stafford, having to rush his throw that sails out of bounds, ending the ball game. I can't say more about this Vic Fangio defense. I mean, that is the absolute strength of this team. I mean, just from all 3 levels. Before, it was just the defensive line where guys like Hassan Reddick and Javon Hargrave were just leading the charge with a bunch of sacks in the 2022 season. But in 2024, it's a well-oiled machine where you have just the elite group of guys working as a team in the defensive line, a great set of linebackers, mainly Zach Bond now with the injury to Nakobe Dean, and the secondary that isn't fantastic, but I mean, CJ Gardner-Johnson has had a great season with a bevy of interceptions. Reed Blankenship has been there, and then you have those 2 standout rookies in Cooper DeJean, Quinion Mitchell, and even Isaiah Rodgers had a fumble recovery and nearly housed this divisional round matchup against the Rams. I also wanted to talk about Matthew Stafford. I mean, the guy who might have played his final game in football, he balled out. I mean, this guy has always given his all to whatever team he plays for. Early on, when you're playing in Detroit, you're kind of resurrecting a team that went 0-16 before you got there, and I think he did an admirable job. But him with the LA Rams has just unlocked another gear, another dimension in his game. And while he's well past his prime, he still has a lot left in the tank. He had a lot of sidearm passes, and his gutsiness throughout his Rams career, I think, is really, really appreciated. And he was really the real reason why the Rams had any chance in this game, especially late against the Eagles defense. The Eagles now hold on. They are on their way to hosting the NFC Championship game the 2nd time in 3 years, and then we're going to preview the conference championship matchup against the Washington Commanders coming up shortly. Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, one of these 2 guys are going to win MVP later this season in the NFL awards, but these 2 put on another show that will be remembered in playoff history. I want to focus on the Ravens in this recap just because I saw a lot of the same issues I've been seeing out of the Ravens, especially in the Lamar Jackson era since he was drafted by the team in 2018. A lot of times we see Lamar make a ton of great highlight reel plays. He's just a freak athlete with the speed and a rocket arm, and I do appreciate all those things. But in the playoffs, this is a different version of Lamar. This is yet again another postseason campaign where they shoot themselves in the foot and they fail to win multiple playoff games. For whatever reason, they can do something really well one game and then just not have it translated to the next game. And for whatever reason, it's the same thing. You're focusing way too much on Lamar and his arm rather than his legs. You get away from running the ball, or the team as a whole just has fouls or penalties at the worst times possible. This is all kind of coming back to a reflection of John Harbaugh. I'm not calling for him to be fired or him to be put on a hot seat, but this is just a reoccurring theme that I'm seeing out of the Baltimore Ravens. And Lamar, too many times now, has just come up short in these big moments. I mean, I think he did spectacular in the second half, but his first half performance, the interception, where, what are you doing, man? You're just overshooting it to the moon, basically. The fumble, just trying to get too cute. The snap was high, but you caught it. At that point, if you don't see an option to throw the ball away, I know DeMar Hamlin was crashing down into the pocket. At that point, eat the sack. I saw the replay. I mean, it would have been at the 30-yard line. And, I mean, Tyler Bass made a 50-yard kick. I'm sure Justin Tucker, who's responded after a midseason slump, that he could maybe make a kick that was within the 50-yard range, even in wintry conditions. There always seems to be some type of mishandling, whether it's turnovers, it's some type of shortcoming with these Ravens that I'm just kind of appalled, where no matter what happens, there's just something that goes wrong where they fail to replicate such a good playoff performance. I mean, against the Texans last year, they were perfect and they dominated that team 35-10.
But then in the AFC Championship game, they lost to the Kansas City Chiefs at home.
In the previous week against the Steelers, they were excellent. They won 28-14. They looked dominant. But for whatever reason, Derrick Henry doesn't get the ball. And then Lamar's not really featured on running plays. And then talking about Mark Andrews now. Mark Andrews had probably the most forgettable back-to-back drives of his Ravens career, where you're getting momentum back. You're down 24-19. You have a chance to take the lead. And unfortunately, after making the first down reception, he's trying to advance the ball, but he loses possession. It's recovered. The Bills cash in with another field goal, and now you're down 8 with a do-or-die situation. And yet again, Lamar does some theatrics. He does what he needs to do, gets the ball into the end zone, but you need the 2-point conversion. And I thought the play call in this situation was great. A sprint out to the right. Lamar maybe has an opportunity to run it in if he needs to, but he had Mark Andrews is wide open in the flat, and Mark Andrews is a first-team All-Pro tight end, at least in his past, and still has a lot of that in his game today. The ball needs to be caught. It was placed perfectly. I don't want to hear excuses. I know there's a lot of Lamar haters out there, but that particular play was not on Lamar Jackson. If you think about the turnovers, I mean, so many of them resulted in Bills points. The second fumble that Von Miller nearly took back to the house was taken in for a touchdown by Josh Allen. Then red zone problems. You think about the pass where it set up first and goal at the 2-yard line in the third quarter, and for whatever reason they go backwards to the 8-yard line and have to settle for a Justin Tucker field goal. Those things, those failures to execute in the red zone and then hold on to the football and execute late. I mean, you have Lamar Jackson, Mark Andrews, and Derrick Henry, and somehow you go 0 for 2 in 2-point conversions that you absolutely have to have. It's inexcusable. I mean, there's just too many times where they just get in over their heads and fail to execute late. I feel like unless the Ravens are a team that's simply blowing you out and you keep it close, they will find ways to shoot themselves in the foot. Unfortunately, that is just the label that they have. Now, let's talk about the Bills, because I don't want to just be me shitting on the Ravens during this recap. The Bills defense has done phenomenal. I mean, that first matchup, Derrick Henry ran all over them. Unlike the Rams, where, yes, you had a bunch of sacks, but you failed to contain Saquon Barkley, they did a pretty good job on Derrick Henry. I mean, there were a couple times Derrick got loose, and the fact that they were able to keep him under wraps early, I think, deterred Todd Monken from dialing up some run plays for Derrick Henry late. To set the tone, I mean, first and goal at the 2-yard line, you knock him back for a negative play, and then you force Lamar into a sack on the next play by Greg Rousseau. I think that's just a compliment on this improved Bills defense that is a lot different than in their first match. I mean, Matt Milano wasn't there, and there were so many other people in the secondary that were missing. But the Bills are relatively healthy, and they finally get a chance to get back to Kansas City. This might be their time to finally vanquish that demon. This is their best shot at doing so. They have so much around Josh Allen. They're not Josh Allen centric. They're not trying to appease Stephon Diggs, who can be a diva at times. And I think this is such a well-balanced team that from top to bottom, I think you're pretty confident in them going into Kansas City and pulling off an upset against the Chiefs. Previewing the NFC Championship game, this is part 3 between the Commanders and Eagles, 2 big-time NFC East rivals, and they date back all the way to the 1930s. But for this particular matchup, a trip to New Orleans and the Super Bowl is on the line. The Commanders started off hot early. They had a brilliant start to the season behind star sensational rookie Jaden Daniels as he bursted onto the scene, catching NFL media hearts by storm. The Commanders reached a 7-2 record heading into their first matchup against the Philadelphia Eagles, who got off to a little bit of a slow start, 2-2, but figured out things as they returned from the bye week. And in that matchup, the Eagles prevailed at home 26-18. And while the final score was 1 possession, the Eagles just had another gear in that matchup. While trailing 10-3 heading into the back part of the third quarter, the Eagles offense finally woke up. Saquon burned the Commanders defense for 2 long touchdown runs, and the Eagles defense forced a stop on Jaden Daniels on 4th down and intercepted him to essentially seal the game. The second game has a little bit of an asterisk next to it because Jalen Hurts only played 2 drives in this game. And while he was there, the Eagles were dominating. They were up 14-0. They were up 21-7 at one point. And in the second half, with Kenny Pickett at the helm, their offense stagnated and they were restricted to field goals. While the defense did force 5 turnovers, including 2 Jaden Daniels interceptions, they did collapse in the fourth quarter, giving up 3 touchdown passes to Jaden Daniels as he rallied the Commanders to a 36-33 victory. Now, many people forget that in that second matchup that the Commanders did benefit from a key Eagles defender being ejected from the game. And that's CJ Gardner-Johnson, their starting safety. He's the leading defensive back of this secondary, with leading the team in interceptions. And when CJ Gardner-Johnson was ejected from the game after getting into a scuffle with Commanders offensive players, the whole game flipped. The Eagles were in command of that game. They were up by 13 points with possession of the ball. And unfortunately after that, like I said, their defense collapsed. And Jaden Daniels got hot. He had 3 touchdown passes, leading them to a comeback victory. Now, in both matchups, Saquon Barkley ran for over 145 yards and had 2 touchdowns in each game. And yet again, he's going to be key in their success to advancing to the Super Bowl this year. Saquon Barkley has been amazing this year, but this is the biggest game of his career. And expecting that Jalen Hurts is going to be a little bit hobbled after sustaining a knee injury in the divisional round matchup against the LA Rams, well, they're going to need Saquon Barkley to lead the way. He's been their superstar all season, and he's going to need to hit a couple of home runs for them to advance. I do think that their offensive line has a distinct advantage against the middle-of-the-pack Commanders' run defense. And I think they've done better in recent weeks, but the Commanders still gave up a ton of yards per rush against even Jahmyr Gibbs in the divisional round. And it was really just because Jared Goff turned the ball over so often that they had to abandon the run and go pass. I'll give some credit to their defensive backs. Marshawn Lattimore and Sanistril have been great, especially in the recent weeks during the playoffs. But facing A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith is going to be a big test. And I forgot to mention in the second matchup, the bailout in that game was also a Devontae Smith drop. Well, since that game, Jalen Hurts has been missing time at the end of the regular season, but in the postseason, the passing game has been a little bit quiet. And many people are concerned about Jalen's ability to lead an offense. And is this offense a Super Bowl winning offense? Well, the thing is, that's not their formula for winning games. Actually, in games that Jalen throws for even more than 150 yards, they lose. That's really the key in this game. I think that they have to find a way to keep the balance, stick to what they need to do, not be like the Ravens who overcompensate and try to showcase, Jalen can pass the ball all over the yard. Well, passing conditions will be better. The question is, will he have some escapability because he's banged up with his knee? Some injuries to watch, especially for the Eagles, is that starting center Cam Jurgens and starting tight end Dallas Goedert have been missing practice so far this week. And at the time of this recording, they are probably going to be questionable heading into the matchup. Now, whether or not they suit up will be a big difference because that affects the line and also just another pass catcher that Jalen can pass to when the Eagles are on offense. Dallas Goedert is super key because he has been the consistent receiver in this playoff run, and if he is absent, that is a major blow to the Eagles. Cam Jurgens has been a Pro Bowl center, and I expect him to be there eventually, but let's hope that he does find a way to get onto the field for the championship game. Jaden Daniels has a difficult test because in 2 games against this Vic Fangio defense, he's had 3 turnovers. It was only one of 2 matchups in the regular season that he had multiple interceptions in a single game. I understand 5 touchdown passes is great. That is a phenomenal game. But yet again, this Eagles defense is fairly healthy. I think with the exception of the injury to Nakobe Dean for this championship game, the secondary is intact. The Eagles are going to have Quinion Mitchell back in the lineup, Darius Slay, Reed Blankenship, Cooper DeJean in the slot. It should be a pretty good defense, especially with CJ Gardner-Johnson, who I don't expect to be ejected in another game. The big test is also going to be getting pressure and containing Jaden Daniels, because pressure up the middle, especially with the Commanders losing their starting guard in the divisional round, is key, because that's another blocker that maybe can try to stop Milton Williams, Moro Ojomo, but especially Jalen Carter. Jalen Carter took over the game against the Rams, and I expect him to do that against the Commanders. He's had good success in recent games in the NFL playoffs. And Nolan Smith has been phenomenal. He's been great coming off the edge. He has 3 sacks in the postseason. Jalen has 2. As the Georgia Bulldogs defensive front have combined for 5 sacks in 2 playoff games. And with Zach Bond as the linebacker, that's going to be key, especially in coverage, because I think Zach Ertz, the former Eagle tight end, is going to be key, especially when it comes to the red zone. If they can find ways to force the Commanders to be one-dimensional, bottle up the run, keep Jaden Daniels contained in the pocket, and eliminate the edge runs, I think the Eagles have a really good shot to win this game. It comes down to the trenches. I think that's really the Eagles' strongest point, especially it hinges on the health of Cam Jurgens, at least on the offensive side. But with Vic Fangio, he's been just so good in game planning for this type of game. And I think in the second matchup, when they gave up that many points, they took offense to that, because since then they've really clamped down. They haven't given up a ton of points or a ton of yardage. And I expect them to have an improved performance and get in the face of Jaden Daniels early and often. This is going to be physical. These are 2 divisional rivals, and like I said, this is a trip to the Super Bowl on the line. I'm predicting that the Eagles win this matchup, and it comes down to the star power led by Saquon Barkley, the receivers, and just their defense. Their defense is really the strongest unit in the entire NFL. It's the number 1 ranked defense. And if they're all healthy and humming at the same time behind the raucous crowd at Lincoln Financial Field, I expect the Eagles to advance to Super Bowl 59. Previewing the AFC Championship game, well, there's so many storylines. Mahomes versus Allen. Is this finally the time that the Buffalo Bills break through? Because it's been heartache in recent years. The Mahomes-led Chiefs have rather owned the Josh Allen-led Bills. In 3 postseason matchups dating back to 2020, the Buffalo Bills have gone 0-3, losing in the 2020 AFC Championship game, the 2021 Divisional round, and last year's Divisional round when they actually had that matchup at home. Well, they returned to Arrowhead, and while Josh Allen has been good in the regular season, in the postseason, he hasn't been as great, especially against the Kansas City Chiefs. Maybe that's unfair because the Chiefs have been unreal in this recent run, especially with Mahomes, Travis Kelce, and Andy Reid. But I expect Josh Allen to play like the MVP caliber quarterback that he is. He's honestly could be the best player on the field, and he has to be if the Bills are going to advance to the Super Bowl for the first time since the 1990s. Josh Allen is going to need another Superman type of performance, but that doesn't mean just throw the ball all over the field and try to run over everybody. It's going to be making smart decisions when he's throwing the ball. It's going to be checking out of nasty looks against a Spagnuolo-led defense and audibling to what is a better look, whether it's a hot read, whether it's audibling to a run with James Cook, whatever have you. Josh Allen's going to have this game all over his fingertips, and it's going to come down to possessing the ball, keeping Mahomes on the sideline, and simply just being the best player on the field, like I said. Mahomes, of course, has a say in this. I mean, he has been spectacular, and while the Chiefs don't blow anybody out, they do make the plays to win. That's just really all it's been about this year. The only loss this year has been against Josh Allen and the Bills. The second loss, was a meaningless game when they were resting the starters and the Broncos beat up on the backups of the Chiefs. Well, this is for all the marbles. This is for a trip to the Super Bowl. This is for legacies. And this is really the Bills' best shot. I've been saying this for time in and time out. It seems like each year this is the Bills' best shot to beat the Chiefs. Well, this could also be the final shot to beat the Chiefs. The Bills have to be smart, they have to be disciplined, and just be better. I think that's going to be the difference in this game. They're going to have to keep Mahomes contained in the pocket, and if there's contact involved, you have to watch the sidelines, you have to watch the late hits, because we know the refs absolutely do favor the Kansas City Chiefs. It's just there in the tape. There were some damning graphics coming out this past week about how penalties are just so heavily favored in a team like the Chiefs. For the other side of the argument, at least, Josh Allen absolutely does flop as well. But in terms of the matchups especially, it's going to come down to Spagnuolo coming up with a good defense to confuse and force Josh Allen into being Superman, forcing balls into tight windows. The Bills pass catchers absolutely need to find ways to avoid Trent McDuffie, and if Trent McDuffie is guarding whoever the receiver is, it just comes down to Josh Allen not picking on him, because McDuffie is a nasty defensive back, especially when he's guarding guys in the slot or even on the outside. The Bills' offensive line, they have to find a way to block George Karlaftis and Chris Jones, because in this postseason, especially Karlaftis against the Houston Texans, albeit against a leaky offensive line, Karlaftis has been in the face of quarterbacks throughout the entire season. But also it's going to come down to how McDermott, a defensive-minded head coach, goes up against his teacher in Andy Reid. The protege hasn't had the best looks, especially in the playoffs, when it comes to situational management. We've been hard on Sean McDermott in the past, but I think at least this year he's stuck true to his gun. He's been aggressive, he hasn't been conservative, and he's trusted his defense that is finally getting healthy at the right time of this year. Matt Milano is back. They have an improved secondary as well throughout numerous acquisitions in the offseason. I think this is the year, at long last, that the Bills finally break through and they do beat the Kansas City Chiefs to go to their first Super Bowl since the mid-90s. So that's it for this week's episode of Spectator Sports. Thank you everybody for tuning in. Remember, we are on the grind to 300 subscribers by the end of the NBA Finals in June. If you could drop a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. If you want to get clips from today's episode, we got that through here on YouTube and our various playlists, as well as on TikTok for now. And if you want to enjoy Spectator Sports from an audio perspective, we got that for you on Spotify. I'll link the Spotify, the TikTok, as well as the YouTube channel, everything in the description. And I'll catch you on the next one. Take care, everybody.